I have to say that no one ever contacted the budget office from the Florio team.
From the campaign.
From the campaign,
right,
to say what the status was. Now, who they may have been talking to, I'm not sure. But I can tell you a few things about the status of the budget the last Kean year. And I digress a little bit, and we'll come back to it. You know, the Kean years started with the problems. Mm-hmm. The economy was way down. The governor was battling with a budget that was submitted in July and basically out of balance right away, and had to raise the income tax and the sales tax.
And the corporate tax.
And actually, no, not right away.
Oh, not right away, okay.
In fact, the last time it was raised before that was in the Byrne administration. Mm-hmm. Most people think of the income tax being the Byrne administration, but the next to the last year in the Byrne administration, the corporate tax had to be raised in order to keep the budget in balance. But anyway, then in the middle of the Kean administration, we had boom in the economy, and the governor was able to do a lot of good things, which we could perhaps get back to. But then the last 2 years, revenues in the economy started to decrease.
National recession.
National recession. So the last year, as I recall, of the Kean budget, which was the budget that was submitted in July, and the new governor would come in and take over in January, was submitted with only an increase of 0.9%. And there were a fair amount of what I would call one-time uses of revenue in there. There was a windfall profits tax.
You wouldn't refer to them as gimmicks.
I wouldn't refer to them as gimmicks, but you could refer to them as gimmicks. Budget directors never refer to them.
I understand.
We accelerated some collection of revenues. Some collection of taxes were moved forward from one part of the year to the other part of the year. There was a federal court decision that allowed us to realize a gain of windfall profit tax from corporations. So all that was built into the budget. And even with those revenues, the budget was only going up 0.9%. So it was a very, very tight budget. And so everybody knew when the budget was submitted. So perhaps if the Florio team was saying they didn't know about it, if they looked at the budget, they would know it was a very, very tight budget. Now, I don't know exactly what maybe the Kean team told the Florio team. That I don't know. But this I can tell you, that it was a very tight budget. There were a lot of one-time uses of revenue in there, which is not necessarily unusual. And then about, I would say August or September, looking at the first quarter of revenues, it was clear to us in the budget office that we were going to have a lot of trouble getting through that fiscal year. And I can remember looking at one set of numbers and saying, well, this is not possible. We can't be that far off of our revenue estimates. And going into the state treasurer, because by then, the last year or two of the Kean administration, we had switched back to the treasurer going into the governor's office with the new chief counsel there. I said to Feather, we need to do something here. And I can remember both Feather and I going into the front office and chatting with the governor and with the immediate staff that we probably need to do something. I don't know whether, I can't swear on a stack of Bibles whether the treasurer said, I think she may have, that we probably need to raise some taxes. And the governor and staff said, well, that's not in the cards. Things won't be as bad as you all are projecting. So the governor loses, or not the governor Florio wins, and he comes into office, and of course they have the transition team.
When did you first meet with anybody from the transition team?
You know, that's a good question. I would say it was probably late November, maybe early December. And the first person I think I remember meeting with was Cliff Goldman. Dialing back a little bit, Cliff was a state treasurer when I first came to the budget office. My career started in the Division of Local Government and the Department of Community Affairs. I was the director of administration over there, and Cliff was instrumental in moving me over into the budget division, working for Ed Hofgazan. He was another great man of the past that I worked for. So Cliff and I had some kind of relationship, more than some kind, a good relationship. So Cliff came in
and if there's anybody who understood the New Jersey budget process, it was certainly Cliff Goldman.
And then I think we wound up with Nate Scrivonic involved into it. And I think in the beginning, of course, one of my first reactions were, I can give you some data, but I need to recheck with the front office first. And because I still worked for Kean administration. But that sort of evolved pretty quickly. So we described the problem. And to make a long story short, once the governor came into office, January, we had to take extensive actions to make sure we were going to end the year with a balanced budget. And when I say balanced budget, it has to be based upon modified accrual basis, not a cash basis of accounting. We had to do it the right way. So we took a lot of extraordinary actions. Preparing for this meeting, I went back and looked at some of my notes. There's about $600 million of actions. Now, $600 million today doesn't sound like a lot.
Well, yes, it does.
But in $35 billion budget, $600 million, yeah. But in a $12 billion budget, $600 million is bigger than in a $35 billion budget, right? So we took a lot of external actions. We went to the legislature to ask them to change payment dates. So instead of making a payment date to a municipality in May, we were going to switch it to July. So what did that do? To the municipality, it didn't make any difference because they were on a calendar year. But to us, it allowed us not to pay out about $200 million that we would otherwise have had to pay out. And we did it legislatively, otherwise it wouldn't be what I would say, a correct accounting procedure to not make that payment.
But for all practical purposes, that simply defers that $200 million liability into the
next
fiscal
year. No, it doesn't. It just becomes a new liability next year.
Oh, okay.
Right. But you're right. And I can remember this at the tail end of the administration leaving, Kean administration. A senior person in the governor's office asked me to make sure I made the payments to higher education colleges for the salary program that was due to everybody. I digress a little bit. Usually when there's salary increases for state employees in colleges, we budget that money in a central account and do not allocate it immediately to the agencies. And from my point of view, I was not going to give that money out because I knew we had a big problem. So we needed to hold on to that money and use it to lapse it, not spend it. And I got a phone call from a senior person in the governor's office, we'll say, and say, make sure you pay that money out. And I said, I'm not paying that money out. We are in a deficit situation. And the person said, the governor wants you to pay it out. And I said, I don't want to be disrespectful, but if the governor calls me and tells me, then I'll do something. But otherwise, we need this money. And as it turns out, we ended that fiscal year with $1 million surplus. We froze all capital accounts, not only froze them, de-obligated the money in order to generate a cash balance. We reduced salary programs to the agencies and basically directed them to transfer monies within their agencies to make sure they end it. So to end the year with $1 million surplus, on top of doing all those kinds of things, you have to know that there was a big problem out there. Mostly driven by the economy. There was a lot of consternation in the Governor Kean's submission of that last budget. A lot of Republicans were wanting more state aid given out to agencies, or out to state and local, out to local governments. Senator Russo on the Democratic side was as much a supporter of Governor Kean and trying to have some restraint in the budget. But even with the restraint, which was not a big budget increase, if you may remember, I said a 0.9% increase, still was not able to weather it through. So the governor comes in, we make all these adjustments in order to end the year with a $1 million fund balance. But then that presents the problem for next year, right? Because we've done all these kinds of things. And that was basically the decisions that were being made, if we want to move into that, during the budget submission time for Governor Florio's first budget. What does he put into that budget? How does it get financed? And
well, at the same time, he has to deal with the deficit that's
correct.
Under the existing budget.
So we're submitting a new budget for next year and dealing with the current budget.
By the way, did Tom Kean ever call you personally to release the money to the? Okay.
No, and I didn't release the money, much to that person's consternation. And